I'm
This
sure
is
it's
what
been just
I'm
a few
reading.
years. Oh, cool.
You might like to
Audiobook?
know this, by the way. I read this book that's on a oversized iPad there, but that belies the fact that I read it on audio through driving through the mountains of Montana.
Nice.
So it's a nice way to take in ideas. It made it a little tricky for bookmarking, but there's a
Yeah.
way to do it. And usually, David, I'm not trying to just pump up your tires here, but um, usually the number of bookmarks that we hit is sort of a rough indicator of the quality of the book. We read a ton of nonfiction business books, and we've just got we've got several bookmarks a chapter off of your book.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Yeah, listening to an audiobook versus actually reading a paper book versus reading an electronic book, I feel like it all kind of there's it depends on what your mental state is, what you're trying to get out of the book,
yeah.
and your level of commitment to absorbing every last bit of it. Sometimes you just want ambient awareness of something, and
Yes.
that's the time where 2x speed audiobook while you're doing something else uh, can work out.
It just occurred to me that we were a little abusive of the folks who will listen to this, and that you and I together launched into four stages ripping by. Could you do everyone the courtesy of just a short précis of what those are? I mean, in truth, we want
Yeah,
people to just go read the book. That's the best. That's a very good source, but maybe just
explain more things in the
a
book.
précis. Yeah.
Yeah. So as I was saying, the we often get stuck or creatively blocked when trying to solve a difficult problem, and not even just any creative problem like you're trying to invent a new business, but even planning a trip is a creative problem. uh, there's a lot of different parts that you have to consider, and it takes a lot of thinking, and there's a lot of different trade-offs, and there's no one perfect solution, which is a lot like a lot of creative problems or creative projects. And we often get stuck on these things because we, well, I think it's because of the third and fourth stages of creativity. We get stuck on these. There's four stages. The thing that we're going for is we want the third stage. We want illumination. We want that aha moment, but we don't get it so easily because we get stuck either on trying to achieve that illumination, or we get stuck by trying to get the fourth stage verification into our heads. That verification is the details. Is this going to work? It's like doing the legal review before you've even come up with the product. So we get stuck on that third and fourth. We get stuck going for that third stage and thinking too hard about that fourth stage. Um, but the first and second stage are preparation and incubation. And those are the ones that we try to skip. And that's why we have a hard time getting the illumination. So preparation is just learning about the problem. It's turning it over on all sides. This all actually originated from a speech from a great 19th century scientist named Hermann von Helmholtz. He was giving a speech at a banquet that was thrown in his honor on his 70th birthday. And he basically said, inspiration comes suddenly, like a flash of thought, and it never comes to a wearied mind. It never seems to come while I'm at the writing table. There has to first be this period of time when I'm turning the problem over and seeing it from all angles. And then there has to be this hour of perfect bodily recuperation before the kindly inspiration rewards one. I'm not getting the quote perfectly right. I'm paraphrasing here. Basically, you have to really turn the problem over on all sides and learn all about it. And then you have to actually rest. And the amount of rest that you need is going to depend, I think, a little bit upon how much you already know. How important is it that you have a very innovative solution? What's your level of experience in this field? Um, and so it can be that you just go grab a cup of coffee, or it might be that you need to sleep on it, as is a common phrase used in a lot of cultures. In Spanish, it's consultar el almohada, consult the pillow. Um, or in some cases, maybe you need a whole sabbatical of a year if it's that big of a problem, or that important of a thing to for you to tackle. So those are the four stages of creativity: preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. And it comes a lot easier. Ideas come a lot easier when you start to ask yourself, am I trying to skip stages here? And
Mhm.
it's best not to.
A number of our community are very well established. David, they're sort of, I like to say they're 3 degrees and 30 years experience. And that's generally actually true. It's like, you know, a bachelor degree and a couple master's degree and a professional certification like a CPA or something. And uh, they have this incredible immersion in their core areas. And I think when you see them at the top of their game, they're constantly mulling over the current, past, and future problems of their field. And I think that's the reason why, of all the people in the world, the one who's going to next crack, um, a legal innovation for how to, write contracts in a brand new way for organizations that have never had them, are these folks, and it's because of preparation. They're just constantly in and around the material. And so if they go for a long, slow drive, so long as they've dedicated themselves a little bit to problem digestion, it turns out that like you, David, and me, Kevin, are not going to crack nuanced Malaysian legal structures, but they will. But it's simply a result of their preparation.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to react to a major change in some field if you've already been obsessing over it and thinking about how it works and seeing what changes you might be anticipating in the future. And then when the changes come, you start to say, okay, well, I kind of m- maybe there's some elements of surprise to it, but you sort of saw it coming. Um,
Yeah.
and so the more that you're thinking from a first principles structural level about the way that a field works, the more quickly you can adapt. It reminds me of this study that showed that chess masters uh, can more easily memorize positions of chess pieces on a board than your average person. Well, because they have a mental model, a filter from massive amounts of experience in studying the game of chess through which to recognize the patterns they
Mm.
see because they obsess about chess. Now, the one exception is if the chess pieces are just randomly strewn about the board in some manner in which they would never end up in an actual chess game, then they're not really better than your average person. So, the more that you're able to think abstractly about a field and continue to make space for thinking about that and absorbing it and coming up with your theories about the way it works and what might happen in the future and what the risks and rewards of various potential decisions and scenarios are, then yeah, you're going to have an easier time reacting to those things. But it does take a lot of dedication of mental energy. I'm trying not to say time because it does take time,
Yeah.
but it doesn't seem when you're doing it that you are putting forth uh, a unit of time and getting a unit of output out of it.
Yes.
It is a
Yes.
long period of mulling things over, and it becomes fruitful when you least expect it.
I want, I'll beg you to just say a little bit more about time, because I think as people launch into your book, there may be a guard up, or they may even just have a full-on allergy early on around, like, this is for some creative soul. This is not for a professional like me in my field.
Ah,
And you make this distinction between kinds of time. There's like clock time and project time. Forgive me if I've
yeah.
misconstrued that, but could you just sort of elaborate that idea?
Sure. I'll start by talking about the title of the book, which is Mind Management, Not Time Management, and what that
Yeah,
means, which is I'm not saying that you shouldn't have some time management. Time management is a foundational uh, element of being productive and getting out of your resources what you want to get. The thing that I'm noticing is that time management is a relic of an industrial age. It probably, you could say that it started with Frederick Taylor in scientific management, standing next to workers doing industrial work, such as moving pig iron or stacking bricks with a stopwatch, and looking at the different actions that were done and how long do those actions take. And so, therefore, we can program these people like robots and find the maximum output that we can get for the time that we're paying these people to do this work. And that has continued on through the age of knowledge work. I feel like we're sort of beyond the age of knowledge work now. It's where creativity is becoming more important. We're starting to see a lot of, with the explosion of AI, we're seeing that a lot of intellectual work is probably going to be done by computers. Intellectual work meaning just like crunching numbers or in some cases collecting data and research. But what's really going to be left is the creativity, the innovation. Um, and so one of the things that is that doesn't make sense about this whole idea of a unit of time in equals a unit of product out is that it puts us in an anxious state to always be watching the clock, to feel time pressure. And an anxious state is at odds with being creative, with having good ideas,
yeah.
valuable ideas. And I spoke to a neuroscientist who has studied the neuroscience of creativity, John Cunhos, on my podcast. And he was saying that it's incredibly easy to get out of that creative, insightful state of mind where you're having innovative ideas. I mean, you could be feeling very relaxed and suddenly a car almost hits you and your heart's racing, and then you get a call that something's terrible happening with your mortgage and you might lose your house or something like
Mm,
that, and then now you're in a stressed state and you're not going to be as creative. But it takes a very long time to get into that creative state. uh, Bill Gates is famous for his think weeks, that he would go to a cabin for a whole week just with reading materials, um,
mhm.
because you need to relax and get away from stimulation to be able to think uh, big picture. Uh, Jason Fried from Basecamp just recently got back from a sabbatical and seems to be more creative than ever. I just saw on Twitter he had a wonderful tweet, and that's why I'm thinking about that right now.
Mhm.
So when it comes to this idea of clock time versus event time, that has a lot to do with how anxious we feel based upon how we perceive time. So there's this social psychologist, Robert Levine. He traveled around the world studying attitudes about time in a lot of different cultures. And he found that there were these two ways of thinking about time. There was clock time and there was event time. That some cultures think of time more as a series of events. I'll
Mhm.
get to what that means in a second. Whereas other cultures think of time in terms of time on the clock, minutes, seconds, hours. And not surprisingly, the Western world or North American world, European world is more on the clock time. Um, and a good way to think about the difference between these two ways of thinking about time is something that I was very puzzled by when I first came to live in South America, which was that if there was some meeting that you had with somebody and it was going to be every week, they would say uh, that it's cada ocho dias. It's every 8 days. Does that sound weird to you?
Yes.
Why does that sound weird to you? So let's say, okay, it's Wednesday,
'Cause
it's 6, and we're going to meet next Wednesday at 6. And I
yeah,
say, see you in 8 days. What goes on in your mind when I say that?
I think we're gonna have a 417-day year rather than rather than a 365-day year.
Wow, you're good at math. Uh, yeah. And for me, I just thought that's objectively wrong. What are you talking about? 7 revolutions of the earth separate today at 6 p.m. from next Wednesday at 6 p.m. But they're not thinking about it that way. They're thinking about it as today is an event. Today is a day. It has not ended yet. So today is 1, and then tomorrow's 2, 3, 4, and then we get to next Wednesday and we're on 8. So they're thinking about it entirely in terms of events. Now, there's some other scientists, Tamara Avnet and Anne Selyer, who studied these different attitudes about time and how they affect the way that we perceive the world. And they found that people who, well, first of all, you can get somebody to think more on clock time or more on event time uh, just by sort of changing the task that you're having them do. Or, and actually, in some situations, clock time is going to be better, and in some situations, event time's going to be better. You know, if you're like trying to think of a 10th anniversary gift for your spouse, well, okay, clock time it matters. Like it's got to be on time, but it's not. You're not going to like go to the mall and be like, okay, I've got 15 minutes um, to 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 get this 10th anniversary gift,
Mm,
and whatever I find, like that's it. Like it's gonna be better off. You're gonna be better off if you are thinking more about the event. Can I get this task to reach some sort of satisfying level of quality,
mm,
um, rather than just am I going to get this done? And so they've found through studying, putting people in these different um, mindsets, and also by studying what sort of the native mindsets are of people or their attitudes about time, that when you're on clock time, you tend to be a little more anxious. When you're on event time, you tend to be a little bit more present. Uh, you are more creative. You're more open to new opportunities that might come your way. And that's what being creative or being innovative is is a lot of about is being open to what new opportunities are coming your way. You were talking about learning all about a field earlier. And if you're somebody who's constantly thinking about what needs to get done in your business, and when new news comes out about your field, you're thinking, I don't have time for that. I'm just focused on doing what I'm doing right now. And you're not taking in that new information. Then when things aren't just news because oh some study came out or here's some innovation that's coming, but it's actually affecting your field,
Mm,
then it's too late, right? Because you haven't been open to allowing that information to absorb so you can be creative and sort of react to it not so hastily.
mm. We um, we spoke to a very interesting author whose specialty is public speaking, and she had a framework which I should share with you because I think you'll like it. It's very related, of Chronos and Kairos, which are old gods, um, Greek. I
Yeah.
think that's right. Yes, Greek.
Yeah,
And
that'd be
Chronos is obviously the god of clock time, and Kairos is the equivalent for event time. And that when you're speaking, say in the way that you and I are right now, we're running both, right? We want to be sensitive to one another because outside of the conversation we're having, there's fields and commitments. We've got to go have dinner or meet people and things. But in the meanwhile, I have this other ability to compress and stretch time in the quality of our discourse. And so sometimes a conversation flies by and sometimes it takes ages, and that's Kairos. And that can also be in the willingness to just stay silent a moment and to pace the grammar of a conversation with its punctuated silences and so on. So I'll just share that with you from another conversation with an author.
I vaguely remember seeing a little bit on Chronos and Kairos. It's something I should dig into more. But yes, you're right, and that's actually a trick that I do if I'm, say, having lunch or coffee with a friend, but I do have a hard stop in like 15 minutes, or I've run into somebody and on the way to something, and I only have so much time. I'll set a timer on my phone. It's like just tell Siri, set timer for 15 minutes, set timer for 5 minutes. And then, the phone is, I stow it, get it out of the way, put on airplane mode. And interestingly, that doesn't make me more anxious about, how much time I have, about my time crunch, about my time pressure, as scientists call it. That actually makes me feel more present because I can feel completely confident that I'm not going to lose track of some commitment that I have and I can be present in that
Yeah,
conversation. Now, it helps that you and I don't have a particular objective that we need to meet right now, other than um, that we're going to have a conversation and explore, and hopefully some of what we say will be useful or interesting to your listeners. I mean, that's an important distinction. Um, there's a really common uh, or really popular time management technique called time boxing, and which is funny when you think about it just from a language standpoint. Is like, oh, is that how much we're like fighting against time? We're like boxing it. But I was talking to Nir Ayal about this. He's written a book called Indistractable, and he made me think about this in a different way. Is that, well, time boxing? First of all, what it is basically saying, well, depends on who you're listening to, but the way it should be is that you have some activity that you're doing, and you've decided this is the amount of time that I'm going to do this activity. Some people think of it as um, uh, planning out your task and how long each task is going to take. But the thing that he said that made me think about it differently is that, well, time boxing isn't meant for when you have some sort of objective or goal that you're trying to achieve in mind. It's when you want to get sort of the minimum effective dose of something. So, maybe there's a friend that you haven't spoken to in years, but you know that if you talk to this friend, you're going to talk to them for 3 hours, and you just don't have 3 hours. And you say, hey, let's make it 15 minutes. And if you have the discipline, you talk to them for 15 minutes and that's it. And it's not as great as talking to them for 3 hours, but it's better than not talking to them at all.
Mm.
And after that time, then you're thinking about the friend, and maybe you send them a follow-up message about something that you talked about. So you actually end up getting a lot of value out of that thing. But what was important was that with that 15 minutes, you weren't trying to achieve something. Now, that can be useful for certain things. Like if you're not, if the execution is really the thing that needs to get done, and it's not so much that you need to come up with an amazing creative or innovative idea, then yeah, looking at how long a task takes you, planning ahead, okay, I've got 2 hours left in this afternoon. I've got these things on my to-do list. Can I actually do all these things? How much time do I have? And which
Yeah.
things can I, you know, dedicate 5 minutes to? And that's all I got. And which ones do I need a little bit more time? And planning in that way can be useful. Um, but it will get you into that clock time mode, and it's n- not likely to make you particularly creative. There are exceptions.
David, one of the things that you explore in the book, and you obviously explored extensively in your own process and life beforehand, is this matching of mental states and times of day, times of the week. There's other kind of diurnal and annual cycles. But at first I thought, this book might be a series of platitudes about, when if you're groggy, you're kind of thinking like this. And then I thought, holy cow, actually, he's gone to quite deep waters here, in that I don't know anybody who's taken the time to really like test, trial and error test, um, what it's like in the morning, what tasks are good in the morning, and not just the morning, but with the additional overlay of, the groggy mind of the morning, or, a mind in grief, and so on. I don't even know what my question is, David. It's something like, do you think that, you've done what I don't know many people have even dared to try. Given what you learned and what you lay out in the book, do you think it's something others can pick up? Could they take what worked for you, what you observed, and put it to work for them, or do you think it's going to be a fresh recipe for each person?
Well, it has worked for a lot of people. A lot of people, I think you might be referring to the seven mental states, which are a mouthful on audio. I'm not just trying to get people to buy the book, but it is a mouthful on audio. um,
Buy the book.
I mean, if you want, but it is a mouth. But the basic idea being that um, work isn't necessarily just deep work versus shallow work, or creative versus analytical work. There are areas of gray between all those, and different flavors uh, amongst all those. And if you really take the effort to examine your own mind and examine your mind's relationship with the mental work that you're trying to do in a given moment, and you make that a habit, you can start to see these patterns. And the mental states that I introduce seem to work for a lot of people, but you could always come up with your own as well. Um, and it can feel like a lot, and it is a lot to start just from square one and expect to have this perfect relationship between matching your mental state with the mental work that you're trying to do. But if you continue to try to do this and you pay attention to certain cycles, such as having a weekly uh, routine instead of a daily routine, you start to notice the way that your energy tends to fluctuate, not even necessarily fluctuate, but tends to adapt to different types of mental work between Monday and Friday and, Saturday and Sunday,
Yes.
what needs to happen on Saturday and Sunday so that on Monday you're effective, and what needs to happen on Friday so that on Monday you're effective. Then I think it starts to become clear, and it's something that if you're somebody who's doing intellectual work that does require learning new things and doing creative problem solving, that it's a very natural uh, next level to get to beyond, say, time management.
Yes. Uh, have you configured these ideas? I'm thinking mainly these 7 mental states, and in combination with types of work. Have you configured that as a course or a line of training before?
um, you know, when I wrote my first book, that everybody was telling me, you can't make money writing books. You've got to have some kind of coaching course. Um,
Yeah.
you have to have something like that. And my first book, I did that for a little while, but then I realized I really just like writing books and I really like the creative process so much that I'm always just writing books. So I haven't, while I'm sure that I could make a bunch of money with a coaching program like that, and I'm sure it would help people as well. That's unfortunate that I don't have that sort of thing set up. Um, but I just keep creating things. And that's why I'm writing books like these, is
Yes.
because I want to be able uh to do the to make things. I'm not
Yes.
like, uh, the way it's supposed to be is, say, David Allen, Getting Things Done author, fantastic book, huge inspiration for me. But he was a productivity consultant for 20 years before he wrote his book. He had looked over
Yes.
shoulders and done that sort of thing. And I feel like that's the type of thing that you can run a business doing that type of work, and it will still be relevant to the content of a book, such as Getting Things Done. But if I were running a business where I was coaching people and running classes, teaching uh, the methods that I share in the book,
Mhm.
then I wouldn't be getting to do the things that I want to do
Well,
and
I
that
can.
result in the content of the book. So it's a
Yes,
different
yes,
sort of
yes.
way that the sawdust has come off the saw.
Well, I think that's, if for what it's worth to you, David, I can just reflect back to you, because we're in the world of corporate education. That's what Sage does. That's our
Yeah.
job. And I can reflect back to you that I think you're thinking about it in the right way. There are further gradations and levels beyond even the ones that you're suggesting. When you write great, working, effective curriculum or courses for, say, working professionals, the person who configures it in terms of the learning design had better be a different person than the person who writes it. The person who writes it is sometimes actually not the original ideas author, but somebody who knows how to speak both languages of the two people I just mentioned.
Oh, wow.
None of those people are the instructor or the coach or the facilitator, all of whom may be three totally different people. And then an
Maybe I need
assessor.
some kind of partnership, but then I just think, oh gosh, well then I'd have to manage that.
No, no, no. Increasingly my view is that all those different characters that I just listed, they're great when they specialize and they do their own thing. The world needs um, creative folks just mired in the content and digging it out. And we don't we don't need to tie you up at the front of a stage somewhere.
We've all also picked up a nonfiction or a business book before and gotten a few pages in and realized, oh, this is entirely a commercial for this person's consulting business. And
Yes,
sometimes those books are really good,
yes,
but sometimes they're just a commercial for a consulting business. And
yeah.
I didn't want to get there.
No, there's I think a fair bit of your creative posture comes through, especially from early on. The very first chapter is quite an interesting like letter to the professional world, where you outline how time is used or squandered, and the pressures that come around trying to do creative work. That's not a commercial. That's distinctly not a commercial. Doesn't have that feel.
Well, thank you.
Um, because we lost a little bit of our Chronos time on tech, there's one super section that I think is great and needs to be shared, which is slippy tools, grippy tools. Can I just like cue you on that? I
Yes.
think a lot of folks will just love hearing that, either because they'll go, yes, I already know this, or they'll go, of course, I should be doing that. I loved this. Where did it come from? And can you just kind of induct us into slippy tools, grippy tools?
Yeah. Well, it came from my own experience, but I think that I've also found some evidence of it in other areas. I remember hearing a story about John McPhee, who is great a great writer, and I remember reading once that he wrote 7 hours a day, and I thought that's crazy because after a couple hours you're just totally spent of writing. But then I realized that his writing process was actually cutting and pasting, typing out things and having a bunch of different notes and arranging them around. And like that's what he apparently considers writing. And I think that a lot of times we get stuck, especially in this age of such fast production. Uh, you can type a novel in a day, say, or 30,000 word novella, you could type that in a day. Okay. Well, would you want to read a novel that somebody wrote in a day? I mean, unless they're really fantastic, that happens sometimes. But the bottleneck in the production is not how fast can you type, how fast can you get the words on the paper. The bottleneck in the production is in your mind. The bottleneck in the production is in the ideas that you are forming, the story structure, the characters, the world that they're in. Just to use a novel as an example. And so I've been experimenting for years now with trying to match the tool that I'm using with what type of mental work I'm trying to do as I'm writing, because not all writing is writing. Um, there are various pieces of writing that are along those four stages of creativity that we talked about earlier. This is something I discovered when I was writing my first book. And I'm not somebody who wanted to be a writer. I didn't enjoy writing as a child, but when I was about 30 years old, I got a book deal and said, "Hey, let's do this." And it turned out to be extremely difficult. And I found myself banging my head against the wall 12 hours a day. But then all of a sudden, I would hit this flow where for 15 minutes or in 15 minutes, I could write an entire draft of an entire chapter. And I was asking myself, well, why can't I just sit down and write for 15 minutes? Well, it's because there's those four stages. And that's when I realized, well, I have to have that preparation. And so some of that preparation is at the time was putting a whiteboard on my floor and putting different books around and just writing little notes on the whiteboard trying to get wrap my head around and understand everything that I needed to absorb, all the preparation that I needed to absorb to then sleep on it, the incubation, to have illumination the following morning, writing
Mm.
on, say, my computer where it's being saved. And so that experimentation has progressed to where people who are watching on video can see behind me uh, this weird black keyboard with a tiny screen on it. That is an Alpha Smart, and that is it's like a got like a calculator screen on it on a keyboard, and it can hold 12 different files. And it used to be used to teach typing in schools. They don't make them anymore, but there's a whole cult following of these things that writers buy them used off of Amazon, and people are refurbishing them, or they're doing mods on them and painting them, and there's a whole cult following behind them. But it's a wonderful tool. Uh, that was the first tool that I really experimented with. Uh, that was a little odd. And the thing that I love about it is I could just grab it and type. There's no interface elements to get in my way. There's nothing there to distract me. I just type. And then I often, when I'm done typing, delete what I've just written. Why? Because what's important is not the output. What's important is what connections were just made in my brain. And so through that principle, I've thought about matching what I'm trying to accomplish mentally with the tool that I'm using. And so that has grown into this idea of grippy versus slippy tools. A grippy tool being a tool that is just for writing or just for the task that you want to be doing. Um, and I think that people naturally think, well, I need to just grab my laptop. But in your laptop's a slippy tool. Your laptop is connected to the internet. It has all sorts of notifications on it. Even if you make it so it's not connected to the internet, you're going to get some software update notification like in the middle of working on something. And as smart as computers have gotten, it's usually not a good time for you to update the software and you get off track. Whereas
Yeah.
with this Alpha Smart, it's just the writing. Now it's gotten quite extreme for me now, where people can also see behind me two typewriters on my shelf. Those are not just decoration. One was from an antique store to sort of prototype the idea of working with a typewriter. I loved it. I ended up going and buying a totally refurbished typewriter, and I love writing on a typewriter. It is a grippy tool. It can only write. There is no fooling yourself. You are writing a first draft. You're not going to just hit publish on whatever it is you're writing. But again, this is matching the tool with what I'm trying to do mentally. And the way I use it, my typewriter, is I just write on paper, I'll type, and it'll be stream of consciousness, and it's not necessarily um, organized, as Hemingway said, the first draft of anything is and that's exactly what it is. And so I'll just have an idea and type several pages of it, and there's no paragraph breaks or anything. And as I'm typing, I might type in parentheses little asides about sort of the meta level of what I'm thinking about. And then I sort of let it sit. And then another time I go over it looking with a highlighter and highlight some of the things that I think are interesting. And people think, well, can you just use OCR and get it on your computer? I've tried that. It doesn't work, surprisingly, because it's mechanically reproduced writing. You'd think it would be good at it. But that's actually not the point. With my Alpha Smart, I can connect a USB cable to my computer and it will type it into a document. I usually don't do that. With the typewriter, I can't do that at all. But it doesn't really matter because I've made the connections in my brain. I've done some of the preparation. I've allowed some incubation. And so then when I finally am ready to get on a computer where I have a good enough grip on the idea that the
Mm,
fact that I'm using the Slippy tool that I could check Twitter on or that I could check my email on um, isn't going to be so much of a threat to me actually making any progress, then I can actually type it. And by the way, I actually do most of my writing on an old iPad that I connect a keyboard to. Because it's so
mm,
old and slow, it actually works fine for writing, but it's actually really painful to, do any social media on there. And I don't really have any distracting apps on there. So
mm.
just always trying to match what tool I'm using with with how good of a handle I have on the idea, which is actually kind of an ironic coincidence, is that I'm talking about grippy versus slippy based on how well the tool grips whatever the task is, but the
Yes.
tool that matches the task or which tool is right for the task has a lot to do with how good of a grip do you have on what this idea is that you want to execute. Is it a matter of I just need to execute this, or is it
Mm.
that you actually need to collect information and think about this? The tool is going to be different based on those your answer to that question.
Yeah. Throughout your book, you have these great quotations. You conform to a very old nonfiction pattern. You see this in books from the mid to late 1800s that they start a chapter with a quote from someone famous, and you have quotes aplenty. But one is from Robert Frost, where he's talking about how limitations help, right? And I believe the quote is that free verse is like playing tennis without a net. Um, but I think there's when as you were talking, what's going through my head is that these grippy tools are create fence lines outside of which we can't go. You can't check Twitter on your Alpha Smart. And good
Good
things come
fences
of
make good
those.
neighbors.
Yeah, let's talk about Frost. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Like, actually, particularly Mondays, we were talking about sort of rhythms in the week and creative energy. Uh, I find that Mondays are great creative days for me. I make sure I schedule nothing on Mondays. Um, and so Mondays, I sit with my typewriter or a little whiteboard. Maybe sometimes my Alpha Smart. It all depends upon, again, my relationship with what it is I'm thinking about. And I'm just writing about what I'm thinking or writing very high level about what I'm working on. Um, and I find that Mondays are when I have the most energy because I've things have incubated over the weekend. Friday afternoons, I'll often sort of prepare myself for that, but just not touching any devices and just focusing on typing or writing away from devices on Mondays and thinking. And that kind of has a nice halo effect throughout the rest of the week. And I find that's where I get some of my best ideas. So, yeah, there's fences physically in that when I'm on my typewriter, I'm not going to be checking my email. But then I also create fences temporally or mentally through rules
Yes.
such as that, um, which help focus toward achieving whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And in this case, it's creating putting myself in that event time state where I'm not checking my watch to see if there's a meeting that's coming up because I know it's Monday and I just don't take meetings on Mondays.
Yes. David, the let's call it like the second last thing I want to ask you about is what you're reading and writing right now. You're
Oh,
such an interesting character in terms of the number of the certain kinds of commitments that you've made, whether that's living in Medellin or writing about the stuff you do. But what are you reading and writing now?
I just went back to my shelf to pick up some of my typewritten pages. Um,
Great.
so what I'm reading, I just finished uh, The History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. I
Super.
took a little bit of philosophy in college, but I wanted a nice primer. It's a long book, 1,200 words, or
Yeah.
1,200 words, 1,200 pages. I have more than 1,200 highlights in it. And it's, from ancient philosophers, Plato, etc., to um, modern philosophers. I can't remember where he ended, but it's, somewhere around 1900 or something. But, you know, getting an introduction to folks like Hume and Kant. Um, and I got to say there was a whole section that was just all the Middle Ages, just and where the best thought that was going on was just in Catholic parishes and stuff, and that part was
Yes.
a slog. Um, and but it did teach me a lot about European history. So I finished that. I'm reading War and Peace. Um, another very long book, just,
Yeah.
just insanely long. And
So
I don't.
it's like this is actually a weightlifting program that you have. It's like, am I gonna carry these Bertrand Russell with me, or am I gonna carry Tolstoy with me?
I thought you were speaking metaphorically, but yes, I mean they're ebooks, but
Uh,
it is mental weightlifting. I'm actually somebody I actually enjoy reading books that are really hard to read. That you
yeah.
have to I have to read the same page 2 or 3 times before I go on to the next one. Um, very slow. I'm not a speed reader, and I'm just like trying to understand what I read, and then I highlight and go back. I export the highlights because I read everything electronically, and then I'll typically go back over things. Reading a lot about Raphael and Leonardo because I'm working on a new book, and there's a chapter that contrasts and compares Raphael and Leonardo. That's I'm going to do some research in Italy about them to
Great.
make sure I get some of my facts right and get more in touch with them. Um, and yeah, so that's in my book about finishing, which is going to be the third book in the Getting Art Done trilogy, that of which Mind Management, Not Time Management, is included. So the book working title is Finish What Matters. Um, it is about following through on specifically on creative projects,
Mhm.
which I think is very different from your typical sort of follow through. And I gotta say, I'm having a hard time finishing it.
Well,
So I
I
think
think you
what will happen.
you can count yourself among a good company, which is the writers who write because they struggle with a problem. Their writing is a struggle that they had with a problem, as
Yeah,
opposed to smarty pants who's got it all together and then just lays it down on a
yeah.
on a
So
pages.
part of that, I've got some typewritten pages here, and by the way, all these are on scrap paper. I don't even have to buy typewritten paper.
Yes.
And if anybody's wondering about the environmental impacts, I did the numbers. Using your computer for 1 hour is the same carbon footprint as 7 pieces of paper.
Wow, well, that's a super cool, stat.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, this was
Yeah.
rough calculations. I'm probably wrong,
No,
but
but it's
you know,
probably, directionally correct. That's really interesting.
yeah, you're using your typewriter. You know, you're not using any electricity. I mean, that's a drop in the whatever. I'm a pragmatist when it comes to environmental issues and so you know, maybe it doesn't make a difference, but uh, if uh, if everybody was writing on typewriters, maybe we'd use a little bit less electricity. But anyway,
So
so here's
that's
some
great. You're
typewritten
gonna be
pages.
working on this, manuscript on finishing
Yeah,
and roughing it out in, like, Cremona and, Lake Como and Venice or whatever.
yeah, I'll be doing some. Well, it'll be in Rome a lot and Florence and I'm probably gonna have to. I'm not Milan's not my favorite Italian city, but I'll have to go there. I think for some Leonardo stuff. And I really want to stay in Machiavelli's farm where he spent his exile and wrote The
Oh, great.
Prince.
Yeah,
Um,
great.
I'm a Machiavelli fan, which is probably something you're not supposed to admit, but I really love The Prince. Recently, summarized it on my podcast, and so what I've got here a part that I'm working on for the book, which is the four sources of shiny object syndrome, and those are on typewritten pages.
Well,
So that's some of what I'm reading
that's
and writing. Probably more than you wanted to hear.
no, no, on the contrary, I wouldn't ask it if I didn't wanna hear, and you delivered. We will wait with
I could go
anticipation.
for 5 hours more.
The other thing is we're gonna go after having read your book, we're gonna go check out The Heart to Start, which was your first book. Oh, I
Yeah.
don't know if it was your first book, but it was the one prior to this at least.
Yeah, yeah, that's the first one in the Getting Art Done series. My first book was Design for Hackers, and that came out in 2011, and then I, you know, tried doing courses and stuff and realized I just wanna write. So that's,
Yeah.
The Hard to Start came out in 2017, and that was the first of this trilogy, which I hope to complete and move on to other things.
Is there do you see anything small or medium or big or otherwise that we can do to help you?
Um, well, yeah, you know, my podcast, Love Your Work, is kind of my open mic. It's one of my many
Mhm.
open mics. I really like to stand up. I'm a huge stand up comedy fan. If I could wave a magic wand and be excellent at anything, it would be
Yes.
stand up comedy. But that desire is not strong enough to overcome my lack of natural talents
Yes.
in being funny and my lack of taste for what I think that lifestyle would entail. The loud bars and uh, sleeping in uh,
Insane
bed bug
nights in
infested
weird cities.
hotels and all of that.
Yeah.
Not that I am saying that I think that I could do it. I'm just saying that I won't even try. But I love the way that stand-up comedians do their creative process. I think it is the blueprint for creative processes, which is to
Right.
write down ideas, go to open mics, test them out, do smaller shows, kind of mixing and matching and integrating and
Mm,
eliminating various elements. And then eventually, every once in a while, having your 1 hour special and then scrapping all
right.
that and starting over. And so, my podcast, Love Your Work, is sort of my open mic. And this finishing book that I'm working on, I workshop a lot of the ideas that I'm working on for that book on my
Mhm.
podcast. That's where I share them. And so go listen to my podcast and let me know if you find any of it interesting.
Well, super. That's done. We will. I like our own team, smart folks, and so that's one small crew. But we'll also as we just cut and produce this, we'll just shamelessly direct people there. So we'll track it down for ourselves, and then
Oh,
we'll link
cool.
books to head there too.
Thank you. Yeah,
And
love your work wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts,
yeah,
Overcast, Spotify,
yeah,
Pandora,
super. Well, we will do that as well.
and YouTube as
David,
well.
we will watch you and follow you with some real interest. I think you've written a great book. If I didn't think that, I would just say some other nice thing and skip that line. I don't have to say something like that. And we, as you know, we read a lot of books within the category.
Yeah,
So thank you for
that's
the
wonderful to
time
hear.
and the
Thank you.
energy that it took to just put that thing together in the very first place, but then also some dedicated time for us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be invited, and it's an honor to hear that you like the book.